First thing you're going to do is sketch out your project. Here we have the segmental arch sketched out. I would like to do a sort of triple row lock arch. We're going to need to figure heights, and we're going to need to get a brick estimate. Right here, I'm going to be around 28 inches in height from my pier before I start my skewbacks. The arch itself is going to be about 12 inches in height, and then we're going to have 3 courses of brickwork over top of the arch. I'm not 100% sure where this spring point is going to be. I would like it to be right at the very base of the opening. However, I may adjust it an inch depending on where the top of this arch is going to be. I would like it to work coursing when I cross over. So I might adjust that spring point up to a couple inches so that it works brickwork when we cross over. I need to estimate brick. It's going to be roughly 300 brick for the piers and the crossover. And what I'd like to do, since this is for instructional purposes, I'm going to make the arch a different color brick, and we'll make the skewbacks and the creepers and the bird's mouth cut a completely different color also. Next step, pick an area where you know you're going to have enough room to build the project. We have 2 20-inch piers and a 48-inch opening. We're going to need approximately 88 inches of space. And we have that here. This is a good area for setting up our project. Snap a chalk line. Stop your project approximately 30 inches to 36 inches away from the inside face of your wall. Piers are going to be 16 inches. Want to add 30 to that, go out to 46 inches. Center, approximate center, you're going to want the mortar pan. And the brick evenly distributed. Now we're going to dry bond our first course. Now that we dry bonded right through the opening and mark the corners for our piers, we're going to use our framing square and draw nice square lines on the edges of our pier and the edges of our entire project. Using a laser, let's check the height of our floor, see if it's level. Let's see, at the bottom of the laser we have 3.5 inches over here. The other corner of our project, we have 3 1/4 inches. Means that side is 1/4 of an inch lower than this side. So we'll have to adjust in our first quarter. Going to recheck the heights using the laser again. On top of the brick we have approximately 3/4 of an inch to the bottom of the laser. Over here we have approximately 3/4 of an inch to the bottom of the laser. We are level. Now going to continue the first course layout using a Streamline. I'm going to place a couple blocks on the outside of the project and hang a Streamline on the block instead of the brick. If we hung the Streamline on the brick, we would just pull the brick. Our Streamline is at the proper height and it is pulled taut, so there's no sag in it. We'll continue with our pier layout. If you'd like to double check the back side of the piers with a Streamline to make sure they are aligned with each other, now's the time to do so. They should be pretty close after using the framing square. Now we're going to build our piers up to our form height, approximately 28 inches in height for both piers. I'm going to be using spacing ruler using the number 3. I prefer tighter joints. I have tight head joints. I think the tight bed joints will look nice. Every so often, hang a string line from pier to pier. Make sure your piers are still in line. now that our piers are built, they're level with each other and they're in line, we need to figure out what the dimensions are of our form. This is a segmental arch, so this isn't going to have a simple rise to it. We're going to need to do some math. If we were doing a semicircular arch, it would be easy. We have a 4-foot opening. Our rise of our arch would be 2 feet, half of 4 feet. Since we're doing a segmental arch, we're going to need to take some measurements. We're going to start with finding the center of these 2 piers. Now we are approximately 4 feet apart from each other. Let's try and be as exact as possible. And we're about 4 feet 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to split that in the middle. Go right to 24 1/16. Here's our center mark. The next dimension we're going to need to take is from our center mark to the top corner of our pier. I'm going to use my stick rule, and I'm going to use the bottom of the numbers, the bottom of the stick rule, to measure up so you can see. From our center line to our top corner, we're pretty much exactly 37 3/8. So I'm going to write that number down. 37 3/8. We're going to need another measurement before we can continue, and that is the height of this pier. We're going to be as close as we can in height. Get exact measurement. I'm going to round it to the nearest eighth, and right here we're at 28 1/2 inches. So I'm going to write that number down also. 28 1/2. We need to find the difference between these two numbers. 37 3/8 minus 28 1/2. And we wind up with, what is that? 8 7/8. I'm going to write that down. 8 7/8 inches. That's going to be our rise of our segmental arch form. So let's see, if our numbers work out correctly, we should have, let's say, I'd like to do the triple row lock arch. Nominally or close, that's going to be 11 5/8 inches for 3 courses. But we're going to squeeze a little bit. We might be able to get that down to 11 1/2 inches total height, maybe even 11 3/8 total height. Since we're having relatively skinny joints, I would like relatively skinny joints in the arch. So with a rise of 8 7/8 plus 11 5/8, let's see if that brings us to a good coursing. And that gets figured by adding those two together. 11 5/8 of the arch and the 8 7/8 of the rise of the bottom of the arch. I know it's a lot of numbers and it's a good amount of figuring, but if we add 8 7/8 to 11 5/8, what do we get? What's that? 19. We get 20 1/2. I'm going to write that number down. 20 1/2 inches. 20 1/2 inches. I'm going to put my thumb at 20 1/2 inches, my thumbnail at 20 1/2 inches. Turn the ruler around, and that puts us right at spacing rule 3s, which is good. That's good for the height of our piers. So we're pretty much going to stick with that. I might even make the rise 9 inches, maybe to squeeze another 1/8 of an inch off of the 11 5/8. We'll see. We'll see. But our height should be good. So we have our 8 7/8 for the rise of our arch form. The total arch is going to be 11 5/8 with 3 row lock brick on top of each other. I'm going to draw this on a piece of paper and show you that. It might be a little easier to understand. Here's our initial sketch of our arch and our piers, and this is what I mean by the triple row lock arch. Let's plug in some measurements here. We determined that from here to here we had 28.5 inches. From this corner of this pier down to there, down to our center mark, we had 37 3/8. We need to figure out that difference. What's the difference between these two numbers? 8 7/8 inches. That 8 7/8 inches comes into play right here. This rise from the bottom of the arch to the top of our piers. It's going to be 8 7/8 of an inch. We're going to need to know this measurement before we start construction of our arch form. So keep this number in mind, and I'll walk you through the process of constructing the segmental arch form. Now we're going to start drawing out our segmental arch on our plywood so we can cut it out and we'll have an arch form. I'm going to explain to you what I was talking about earlier with the 8 7/8 inch rise plus the 11 5/8 inches of brickwork. That gets us to 20.5 inches. If you turn your spacing ruler around, you're going to see that that lines up right with spacing rule number 3's, which is cool. That's what we're trying to go for. However, that puts 3/8 inch joints in between these two courses of row locks. I'm going to try and squeeze this up a little bit. I'm going to make this an even 9 inches. That should, I hope, tighten these two joints up a little bit. We're still going to have 11 5/8 height for this, but we're sort of shoving this arch form up an extra 1/8 of an inch. I think it's going to make these joints look a little better. This is sort of some next level stuff. Nah, it ain't really next level. And when we cross over, the joints should look nice. We should be crossing over with full coursing of brick. So we'll get to drawing it out on this piece of plywood. The tools you're going to need: a pencil. You're going to need your foot rule. You're going to need a framing square and your level, or at least a long straight edge. And I'm going to use my tape measure also. First step in the segmental arch construction is we need to find the center of this piece of plywood. Now my opening is 4 feet. So I'm going to go right to this, which is good for this edge of the plywood. We're not going to be using up that much plywood. I want to try and conserve the plywood. I don't need to be cutting stuff right out of the middle of the plywood. I'm going to use this edge of the plywood. 2 feet is our center mark. We're going to take our framing square. I'm going to draw that center mark a little bit up the plywood a ways. I'm also going to do, just in case this plywood moves on me, I'm going to trace it right on the ground, just this edge. That way if this plywood moves while I'm drawing on it, I know where to put it back to. I have that center line on there. I'm going to extend that center line this way onto the floor. I'm going to extend it a good ways. You'll see why in a little bit. The rise, ideally, well, on the paper it says 8 7/8. We're going to go 9 inches. An even 9 inches. I'm going to mark on the center line 9 inches. Next step in drawing this segmental arch, take our straight edge, this case is our 4-foot level. We're going to go from that 9-inch mark we just put there, or rise, to the corner. We're going to draw a straight line right to that corner. You know what? I'll do it over here. Maybe you can see it a little easier. And that 9-inch mark to the corner, we're going to draw a straight line. Now we need to figure this distance from the corner to the bottom of our rise. I'm going to bring out the tape measure. I'm going to go to the bottom of the numbers. We are at exactly 25 and a half inches. 25 and a half divided by 2. That puts us at 12 3/4. That's the center line of this mark. 12 3/4. Yeah, that's right. Now with this center line, again we take our framing square. I'm going to draw this center line. We're going to find out where it intersects the center line of our arch. Right here. This is our spring point. That spring point measurement being exactly 36 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to draw that 36 1/8. What we do now, we have a couple options. We can get a string line, have somebody hold it right here, go out 36 1/8 with a string line, and we can draw our radius. Or we can cut a piece of wood to 36 1/8 of an inch and use that as something a little more sturdy and draw our radius with that. Back in the scaffold room, found a skinny piece of wood, marked 36 and 1/8 of an inch. I have it clamped down, sturdy. I'm gonna cut it. Now we have our piece of wood cut to length. We can trace out our arch, holding the pencil at the end. Way easier for 2 people. Take it right to the edge of the wood, which it does. Now we'll do the other half. Pretty good. We're going to cut that out. Then we're going to put it on another piece of wood and just trace it. That way we have 2 identical arches. We're going to start cutting out our arch form. One thing that you need to take into consideration is what kind of arch form you're going to be building. Is it going to be wrapped with Luan? If so, that's going to add an extra 1/4 inch to this side and a 1/4 inch to this side, making our arch form bigger. Would you like to inset the Luan into the arch form, right in the middle of the 2 pieces of plywood? That's a little more fancy. Or are you just going to put 2x4s completely around the radius? That's the option I'm going to go with. So whatever this plywood dimension is, that is the overall dimension of the arch form. If I was going to add Luan to it, that would add pretty much an extra 1/2 inch to the overall dimension. 1/4 inch on this side and a 1/4 inch on that side. I'm not going that route. You might have to go that route if you have, let's say, a 47 and 3/8 opening, or I'm sorry, a 48 and 3/8 opening, or a 48.5 inch opening, something like that, where you want that extra 1/4 inch on both sides. In this case, we're just going to put 2x4s eventually all throughout this arch. Take your time with the jigsaw and go slow. Cut one side of the arch form. Now I got to cut the other side of the arch form. I'm going to try not to waste too much of the wood. I'm just going to come over to the side. I'm going to line up the bottom edge, and I'm just going to trace this arch. That way I don't have to do all those measurements again. And I'll have 2 identical pieces once this is cut out. Now that we have both sides of our arch form cut, we're going to need to figure out how long the 2x4s are going to be to put this thing together. Our piers are 15 5/8 of an inch wide. All right, 15 5/8. I would like the arch form to inset from each edge 1 inch. So I'm going to subtract 2 inches from that. (13 5/8 inches is what we would like the total thickness of the arch form to be. Now each piece of wood that we've already cut is approximately a 1/2 inch wide. So we got to subtract 1 inch, 1/2 inch plus 1/2 inch, minus 1. We're at 12 5/8 of an inch. This would be the length of the 2x4s that we're going to cut. We're going to make it easy and just do 12 1/2 inches. 12 1/2 inches for the length of our 2x4s. We don't want the form coming all the way out to the face of the wall. It's going to interfere with our string line later on down the line. And we don't want it too skinny, or else it's not going to be able to hold up the brick. About 1 inch from each edge is a good number. I got a few pieces of 2x4s marked at 12 1/2 inches. I'm going to cut them with a circular saw. If you have access to a chop saw, a wood chop saw, it'd probably be a little faster and safer and easier, more accurate. We got it. Now we're going to start putting the arch form together. Get a bunch of wood screws. Make sure the size of your arch correspond with each other when we put it together. Nice. Now we're back at the project and test fitting the arch in between the piers. We see that it fits nice. This is sort of a dry layout of how the arch is going to go with the 3 row locks. We can test, before we set this form up, our height. Remember, we made the arch form 9 inches instead of 8 7/8. Now we have a nice couple tight joints here, and that puts us right at spacing rule 3, which is what we're looking for. So once this arch form is raised up and the arch is done, we'll be able to cross over real nicely with nice tight mortar joints continuing up our piers.